The church bells were ringing. White petals lined the aisle. 300 guests sat in stunned silence as the organ played the wedding march. Every eye turned toward the back of the church, where a woman in a simple white gown began walking forward. No diamonds, no designer dress, a plain veil, a modest bouquet. But there was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet grace, a stillness that made guests whisper as she passed. She looked like a woman who did not need this wedding to feel complete. She looked like a woman who simply wanted to be loved. At the altar stood Richard Calloway. Tall, commanding in his custom tuxedo, the CEO of Calloway Industries, a name that carried weight in every business circle in the country. His mother, Eleanor Calloway, sat in the front row wearing a pearl necklace worth more than most homes. Her chin was raised. Her expression was not joy. It was calculation. She had never approved of this marriage. She had never said it outright, but her eyes had said it 1,000 times. This girl is not one of us. 3 rows back sat Vanessa Cole. Beautiful, poised, dressed in deep emerald, perhaps too elegant for a wedding she was supposedly attending as a family friend. Her lips carried the faintest trace of a smile, not the smile of someone happy for the bride, the smile of someone who had set a trap and was about to watch it snap shut. The bride reached the altar. She looked at Richard. He looked at her. The church held its breath. And then Richard did not take her hand. He reached inside his jacket, but he did not pull out a ring. He pulled out a thick, white envelope. He held it out to her. The bride looked at it, then at him, her expression calm but confused. The priest hesitated. The organ faded. The silence became something heavy, something suffocating. Richard opened the envelope himself and pulled out a stack of documents. He held them up so the first rows could see clearly. Then he spoke, and his voice cut through the church like a blade. "These are divorce papers, already signed by my attorney. Along with them is a settlement agreement for $200 million. I am ending this marriage before it begins. The woman I married this morning is no longer my wife, and I am making sure she will never need anything from me again." The church erupted. Gasps, whispers. A woman in the 3rd row dropped her champagne glass. Someone's phone flashed. The bride had no family on her side. She had told everyone her parents passed away years ago, that she had no living relatives. She stood completely alone in front of 300 strangers, holding white lilies while the man she had just married publicly destroyed her. Eleanor Calloway stood and faced the guests. She smoothed her dress and spoke with the confidence of a woman who had been waiting for this moment. "My son has made a brave decision. This marriage was a mistake. We realized it this morning. Rather than live a lie, Richard has chosen to face the truth. The young woman will be financially compensated beyond anything she could have ever imagined. I trust you will all respect our family's privacy." She said difficult time, the way someone says, "pass the salt." No tremor, no difficulty, only satisfaction. And then Vanessa Cole did something only 3 people noticed. She silenced her phone, but not before glancing at the screen with a look that said she had been expecting this. She looked at Richard. Richard looked at her for less than 1 second, but it was enough. The kind of glance that tells you everything without a word. This was planned. This was coordinated. And Vanessa was not a guest at this wedding. She was the reason it was being destroyed. The bride looked at the papers. $200 million. A number that would make most people faint. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Richard. Her eyes held no rage, no tears. They held something that unsettled him far more than anger ever could. Stillness. The kind that comes from a person who has seen worse and survived. She reached out and took the papers from his hand. She did not look at the settlement again. She did not look at Eleanor. She did not look at Vanessa. She looked at the priest, standing frozen with his Bible open, and said quietly, "I am sorry you had to witness this." Then she turned to the small table beside the altar, where a pen had been placed for the marriage certificate. She picked it up. She signed every page. She signed the settlement agreement. She placed the pen back. She handed the papers to Richard, and she said 6 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I wish you had been honest." She set her bouquet on the altar. She turned, and she walked back down the aisle, alone, in her simple white dress, while 300 people sat in stunned silence, not one standing, not one speaking. The doors closed behind her, and the last thing the guests heard was not crying. It was the sound of her heels on the stone steps, steady and unhurried, as if she had expected this. As if this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something none of them could ever imagine. Because what no one in that church knew, what Richard did not know, what Eleanor did not know, what Vanessa did not know, was that the woman they had just humiliated and discarded was not a woman without a past. She was a woman who had chosen to hide it. And the reason she hid it was more heartbreaking than anything that had just happened on that altar. 2 hours later, the reception hall was still full, but the atmosphere had changed. The champagne towers looked ridiculous. The flowers seemed like decorations for a funeral. The string quartet had stopped. Clusters of people stood in corners whispering, their faces a mixture of shock and cruel fascination. She probably married him for the money. 200 million? She should be grateful. What did she expect? She was never one of them. Richard stood near the bar, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, drinking his second whiskey in 20 minutes. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. A man telling himself he did the right thing while his body disagreed. Eleanor was beside him, her hand on his arm. "You did the right thing, Richard. She was never right for this family. She had nothing, nothing. And you are giving her $200 million. That is more generosity than she deserves." Richard said nothing. Then Eleanor leaned closer. "Vanessa is waiting in the garden. She has been very patient. Go to her." Patient. As if Vanessa had been enduring some great hardship. Richard set his glass down and walked through the French doors. Vanessa stood beside the fountain, golden light across her face. She looked at him with manufactured tenderness. "Are you okay? I know this was hard for you." She touched his face. She told him he was brave. She told him he had saved himself from a loveless marriage, that now they could be together openly. And Richard, a successful businessman but a complete failure at reading people, believed every word. Because he wanted to believe it. Because believing it was easier than facing what he had done. What Richard did not know was that Vanessa had been planning this for over a year. Eleanor had introduced them at a charity gala, a calculated meeting, because she had decided long before the wedding that her son needed a different kind of woman. A woman from the right world. Vanessa carried an old family name, the manners, the social access Eleanor valued above all. Together they formed an alliance, not a dramatic conspiracy spoken in dark rooms, something quieter, more dangerous. A series of planted doubts, carefully timed. You know, Richard, I noticed she never talks about her family. Has she ever told you where she comes from? I tried to find any record of her parents. There is nothing. Are you sure she is not after the family money? Every seed planted with precision. Every doubt watered with patience. And Richard, who prided himself on being sharp, never questioned why these concerns always came from the two women he trusted most. His own mother, and the woman he was secretly seeing behind his wife's back. Eleanor had insisted on separating the civil marriage and the church ceremony. She said logistics. In truth, it was so the divorce could be executed publicly, in front of maximum witnesses, with maximum humiliation. Eleanor wanted the world to see the Calloway family reject this woman. She wanted the story to spread. She wanted it to be unforgettable. And it was, but not in the way Eleanor intended. 3 days later, the woman known only as Claire, the name she had used for 4 years, was gone. Not just from Richard's life, from everything. Her modest apartment was cleanly, calmly emptied. The furniture remained. The dishes sat in the cupboard. The plant on the windowsill had been watered. But her clothes were gone. Her books were gone. A small wooden box from her nightstand was gone. No note, no forwarding address. Her phone disconnected. Her email deactivated. Her minimal social media deleted entirely. It was as if Claire had never existed. Richard told himself this was proof. She had been hiding something. She took the money and ran. Eleanor agreed. Of course she ran. She got what she wanted. Vanessa agreed too, with a subtle addition. I just hope she does not try to come back and cause trouble. Richard nodded. She will not be back. She has no reason to come back. He was wrong, but not in the way anyone expected. Claire was not coming back. Something else was. Something far larger than Claire herself. Something that had been dormant for years, waiting in a world Richard and Eleanor had never bothered to investigate, because they assumed a woman with no visible wealth was a woman with no importance. 1 week later, a man arrived at the offices of Calloway Industries. He was not announced. He simply appeared in the lobby, dressed in a charcoal suit worth more than the lobby's furniture, carrying a leather briefcase with no logo. The receptionist asked if he had an appointment. He smiled. No, but Mr. Calloway will want to see me. He said it with such calm certainty that the receptionist, without understanding why, called the executive floor. Within 4 minutes, Richard's assistant escorted him up personally. Not because she knew who he was, because something about the way he stood, the way he looked at the building as if he owned several just like it, told her this man could not be left in the lobby. He introduced himself only as Mr. Harding. He sat across from Richard, placed his briefcase on the desk, and opened it. Inside was a single folder. He slid it across and said, "Before you open that, understand something. I am not here on my own behalf. I am here on behalf of a family you have deeply insulted. And when I say family, I do not mean the kind you are used to dealing with. I mean the kind that does not appear in magazines, that gives no interviews, that attends no galas, and that has more wealth than this company will generate in the next 40 years. Richard laughed. A nervous laugh, the kind a man produces when a room is slipping from his control. He said, "If this is about the woman I divorced, she has been compensated more than generously. 200 million is hardly an insult." Mr. Harding did not smile. He tapped the folder. "Open it." Richard opened it. Inside was a single photograph, black and white. A man and woman standing before a building Richard did not recognize at first, but the name carved in stone above the entrance made his breath catch. It was a name he knew not from magazines, but from something deeper. From the kind of knowledge passed down in wealthy families as a warning. Do not cross them. Do not compete with them. Do not stand in their shadow. The family in the photograph was one of the oldest, most private fortunes in the country, built over 5 generations. So large it had never been publicly valued, because no one had ever been given access to the records. The family had no public face. They appeared on no wealth lists. They existed quietly, behind layers of trusts and holding companies spanning 12 countries. And in the photograph, standing before the family's original headquarters, were a man and woman. The man was tall, with kind eyes and silver hair. The woman was elegant, with warmth that transcended the black and white. They were smiling, not posing. Smiling the way people smile when they have built something together and are proud of it. Richard said, "Who are they?" Mr. Harding said, "Thomas and Margaret Ashford. They died 11 years ago in a private plane crash over the Atlantic. They left behind one child, a daughter. She inherited everything. The entire estate, every holding, every trust, every account, every property, everything." Something cold moved through Richard's chest. "What does this have to do with me?" Mr. Harding leaned forward. "Their daughter's name is not Claire, but that is the name she has been using for 4 years. The woman you married and divorced at the altar in front of 300 people. The woman you handed divorce papers to as if she were nothing. The woman your mother called a mistake. The woman your mistress watched being destroyed with a smile. That woman is Claire Ashford, the sole heir to the Ashford estate. And she is worth not $200 million, Mr. Calloway. Considerably more. The exact figure is not mine to share, but I will tell you this. The $200 million you gave her would not cover the maintenance of her family's properties for a single year." The room went silent. The silence that happens when the ground disappears beneath someone's feet and they have not yet started falling. Richard's mouth opened. No words came. His hands trembled. He looked at the photograph again, and then he saw it. The shape of her face, the expression in her eyes. The same woman who had stood at the altar in a simple white dress and signed divorce papers without a single tear. Mr. Harding stood. He closed his briefcase. "I was retained by the family's legal office not to threaten you, but to deliver a message. Miss Ashford has asked that you not be contacted further. Her whereabouts will not be disclosed. She has asked that the settlement money be returned to your account, as she does not wish to keep it. And she asked me to tell you one thing. Tell Richard that I forgive him. Tell him I hope he finds what he was looking for. And tell him I am grateful, because what he did at the altar saved me from spending the rest of my life with a man who never truly loved me." He walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned. "You will not find her, Mr. Calloway. People far more resourceful than you have tried. She does not wish to be found. And when Claire Ashford does not wish to be found, she is not found. Good day." The door closed. Richard sat alone for a long time. The photograph stared up at him, and the $200 million he had used as a weapon of humiliation suddenly felt like the most pathetic gesture he had ever made in his life. But this was only the beginning. Because while Richard sat, trying to comprehend what had happened, the world outside was already shifting in ways he could not control. Within 48 hours, 3 things happened. First, 2 of Callaway Industries' largest business partners received private phone calls. Not from Claire, not from Mr. Harding, from representatives of the Ashford family's legal office, a firm so discreet its name alone made Fortune 500 executives return calls within the hour. The calls were courteous, not threatening. They simply informed the partners that the Callaway family had publicly insulted a person of significant importance to the Ashford estate, and that the estate wished to review all business relationships with any entity connected to the Callaway name. The partners did not need to be told what that meant. Within 3 days, both sent formal notices terminating their contracts. No explanations. None needed. Second, a series of black, unmarked luxury vehicles with tinted windows appeared outside locations associated with Eleanor. Her country club, her charity office, her favorite restaurant. They did not follow. They did not approach. They simply appeared. And their presence, reported by Eleanor's visibly nervous driver, was enough to make her understand, for the first time in her life, that she was being watched by someone operating on a level she could not comprehend. Third, a private investigation firm Richard had never hired began making inquiries about him. Not about his business, about him, his relationships, his communications, his financial records, his connections to Vanessa Cole. They were not aggressive. They did not hack. They simply requested information through legal channels, quietly, with a level of authorization suggesting backing from somewhere very high. When Richard's legal team discovered this, they called in panic. "Someone is looking into you, Richard. Someone with resources we have never seen. We cannot identify who is behind it. The level of access is not normal. This is something else." Richard called Eleanor and told her everything. Mr. Harding, the photograph, the Ashford name, the settlement returned, the partners pulling out, the vehicles, the investigation. Eleanor listened in silence for 3 minutes. When she spoke, her voice was different. For the first time in Richard's life, his mother sounded afraid. "How much money, Richard? How much is she worth?" He said Harding would not give the exact figure. He said the $200 million would not cover her property's maintenance for 1 year. The line was quiet. Then Eleanor said something that revealed everything about who she was. "My God, we could have had it all." Not, "My God, what have we done to that woman?" Not, "She must have been hurt." My God, we could have had it all. The most honest thing Eleanor Callaway had ever said. And the ugliest. Richard hung up. He sat in the dark, and then he did something he had not done in years. He cried. Not loudly. The quiet, uncontrollable tears of a man who had just realized he had thrown away the most valuable thing he had ever touched. Not because of bad luck, but because he had let 2 manipulative women tell him who to love and who to discard. He called Vanessa. She answered bright, as if nothing had changed. Richard said, "I know about Claire. I know who she is. I know what she is worth. And I know that you and my mother planned this from the beginning." Vanessa's brightness faded. "Richard, I think you are overreacting. Your mother only wanted what was best for you. And as for Claire, whoever she really is, she obviously hid her identity. She deceived you. How can you blame us for reacting to a woman who was not honest about who she was?" Richard said, "She did not lie. She simply did not tell us. There is a difference. She wanted someone to love her for who she was, not for what she had. And I was too stupid to see that." Vanessa's voice lost all softness. "Well, If she is so wealthy and wonderful, go find her. But do not come crying to me when you realize she has moved on. And I think it is best if we do not see each other for a while. Things have become complicated. I need to protect my own reputation." She hung up. Richard stared at the phone. Vanessa had done what she had always been going to do. The moment the situation stopped being advantageous, the moment Richard was no longer the prize, she left. She did not fight for him. She did not offer support. She said, "I need to protect my own reputation." It took Richard 10 seconds to understand he had destroyed his marriage for a woman who had never loved him. And the woman who had actually loved him, who had stood at the altar in a simple white dress and signed without a single word of anger, was the woman he would never see again. Over the next month, consequences unfolded with the slow inevitability of a tide. Eleanor's social circle drifted away. Unreturned calls, declined dinners, a charity board meeting where her seat had been moved from the head of the table to the far end. She called her closest friend, Patricia. "Eleanor, people are talking. They are saying you orchestrated the humiliation, that you and Vanessa planned it together, and that the woman you humiliated is someone very, very important. Nobody wants to be associated with your family right now. I am sorry, but I cannot have dinner with you. This week, or next week." Eleanor hung up and sat in her living room, surrounded by the art and the silence of a house that had once been the center of a social empire. She had spent her life building a fortress of wealth and status, and in one wedding, in one calculated act of cruelty, she had demolished it. Not with a crime, with arrogance, with the belief that she had the right to decide who was worthy, with the assumption that a woman without visible wealth was a woman without value. She had been catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. Richard's business suffered more rapidly than anyone predicted. Within 2 months, Callaway Industries lost 4 major contracts. The stock dropped 19%. 2 board members resigned. The bank that had handled the company's primary accounts for 15 years sent a letter requesting a review of all outstanding loans. Not because of default, because the risk team had flagged the company as associated with significant reputational risk. When Richard called the bank president, a man he had played golf with for a decade, the man was honest. "Richard, this is not about your financials. This is about the Ashford name. We do not want to be on the wrong side of that family. Nobody does. I am sorry, but this is business." Richard began to understand something no business school had ever taught him. Real power does not announce itself. It does not give interviews. It does not argue or threaten or raise its voice. Real power moves quietly, through channels most people will never see. And by the time you feel it, it has already done what it came to do. Claire had not sought revenge. She had not made a single public statement. She had not hired a PR firm. She had not even authorized Mr. Harding to threaten Richard. All she had done was walk away. And the world had done the rest. Because the world recognized Claire Ashford's name, even if Richard never had. And the world's most powerful institutions operated on a single unspoken principle. You do not insult the Ashford family. You do not humiliate an Ashford heir. You do not hand an Ashford divorce papers at a church altar and expect the earth to keep turning. 5 months later, Richard received a package at his home, delivered by a private courier who did not wait for a signature. Inside was a small wooden box. He recognized it immediately. The box from Claire's nightstand. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a folded note and a small silver locket, old, slightly tarnished, its clasp worn from years of use. Inside the locket were two tiny photographs: Thomas Ashford, Margaret Ashford, Claire's parents, the people Richard had never bothered to learn about, the people Eleanor had never cared to ask about, the people whose daughter had been treated like a stranger at her own wedding. The note was short, Claire's handwriting, the same neat, unhurried script that had signed the divorce papers. Richard, I am returning the locket because it was never meant to stay in a place where it was not understood. My parents gave it to me when I was 16. They told me the most valuable thing a person can have is not money or a name or a title. It is the ability to walk away from anyone who does not see your worth, and to do so with your head held high. I did that at the altar. I hope you understand it was not weakness. It was the strongest thing I have ever done. I do not hate you. I do not hate your mother. I do not hate Vanessa. Hatred is a poison that the person who carries it drinks, hoping the other person will die. I have chosen not to drink it. I am not coming back, not because I am angry, but because I have learned what I needed to learn. I wanted to know if someone could love me without knowing what I was worth. You could not. And that is not your fault. It is simply the truth. I hope you find peace. I think you will need it. Claire. Richard read it 3 times. He held the locket and looked at the photographs. He tried to imagine what kind of people Thomas and Margaret Ashford had been, what kind of home they had built, what kind of values taught their daughter to stand at an altar being publicly destroyed and sign the papers with a steady hand and a calm face. He tried to imagine what it had taken for Claire to live in a modest apartment, wear simple clothes, suppress an entire identity, all because she wanted one thing. Just one. She wanted someone to look at her and see a woman, not a bank account. She wanted someone to hold her hand and say, "I love you," and mean it, for who she was, not for what she had. And Richard had failed that test, completely, permanently. He set the note down, and for the first time in his life, Richard Calloway felt something no amount of money or victory had ever made him feel. Shame. Not the shame of being caught, the shame of understanding, finally, that you had something precious in your hands and crushed it because you did not believe it was real. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Eleanor sat alone in her living room at 7 in the evening. The house was quiet, the staff reduced, the garden simplified, the charity work dried up, the invitations stopped. She was a woman who had lived her life surrounded by people, now surrounded by silence. She called Richard. "Richard, I need to say something." "What is it, Mother?" A long pause. And then Eleanor Calloway, who had never in her life admitted being wrong about anything, said, "I was wrong. I was wrong about her. I was wrong about everything. I thought she was nothing. I thought we were giving her something she had never had. But she had everything, Richard. She had everything, and she chose to live as if she had nothing, just to find someone who would love her honestly. And I destroyed that. I destroyed it because I could not see past my own arrogance. I am sorry. More sorry than I have ever been about anything in my life." Richard listened. He did not interrupt. He did not argue, because he had been just as wrong, just as blind, just as cruel. He said, "I know, Mother, I know." Then he said something that closed the chapter permanently. Do you know what the worst part is? She forgave us. She sent back the money. She sent back the locket. She wrote me a note and said she does not hate us. That is the part I cannot live with. Not that she left, not that she is gone, but that she forgave us. Because forgiveness from someone like that, someone who had every reason to destroy us and chose not to, that stays with you. That is what you feel every morning when you wake up, and it does not get easier. It gets heavier. Eleanor was quiet. Then she said, "Where is she now, Richard? Do you know?" No, nobody knows. And that is how she wants it. And that was the truth. Claire Ashford had vanished so completely that even the private investigators Richard eventually hired could not find her. She had not gone to any family property. She had not contacted any longtime staff. She had not used any account or name that could be traced. She had stepped out of the world she had briefly entered and returned to a life that was invisible, private, and entirely her own. She had taken nothing from Richard except the knowledge that she had tried. She had loved honestly. She had lived simply. She had given someone the chance to love her for the right reasons. And when that person failed, she had walked away with the one thing no money could buy and no humiliation could take: her dignity. Vanessa Cole fared no better. The social circles she had cultivated began to close. People who once welcomed her now looked away when she entered a room. Her reputation, built on charm and calculation, crumbled when the truth about her role in the wedding humiliation circulated. Not as gossip, as fact. Confirmed by witnesses who had seen her exchange glances with Richard during the ceremony. Corroborated by the timeline of her relationship with him, which predated the wedding by over a year. Vanessa tried to salvage her position. She attended events she was no longer invited to. She made calls that were no longer returned. She reached out to Eleanor, who did not answer. She reached out to Richard, who had blocked her. Within a year, Vanessa Cole was exactly what Claire had been when Richard met her. A woman alone. But unlike Claire, Vanessa was alone not because she had chosen simplicity, but because she had chosen manipulation. And the world had a long memory for people who played games with other people's lives. As for Claire, the story did not end with her disappearance. 8 months after the wedding, a small article appeared in a local newspaper in a town nobody in Richard's world had ever heard of. A human interest piece, the kind that fills a quarter page between weather and community calendar. It described the opening of a new community center providing free legal aid, counseling, and job training for women who had left abusive or manipulative relationships. The center had been funded by an anonymous donor. The donor had one request: a small plaque near the entrance. It read, "For every woman who was told she was nothing, you are everything." The article did not name Claire. It did not mention the Ashford family. It did not reference the wedding or the divorce or the $200 million. But somewhere, in a town Richard would never visit, in a building he would never enter, Claire Ashford was doing what she had always done. Living quietly, giving generously, asking for nothing, and proving every day that the measure of a person is not what they have, but what they give when they have every reason to take. And so the story ends not with revenge, not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a tearful reunion, but with something far more powerful. It ends with a woman who was offered $200 million as an insult and returned it as a statement. It ends with a man who had everything and lost the only thing that mattered because he could not see what was standing in front of him. It ends with a mother who spent her life chasing status and lost the one thing status could not buy: her son's respect. It ends with a mistress who thought she had won and discovered the prize was worthless. And it ends with a woman who walked down an aisle in a simple white dress, was publicly destroyed by the people who should have loved her, and responded not with fury, but with forgiveness, not with revenge, but with grace, not with noise, but with silence. And that silence was louder than anything anyone in that church had ever heard. Because in the end, the people who hurt Claire Ashford did not need to be punished. They punished themselves. Richard punished himself every time he looked at the empty side of his bed. Eleanor punished herself every time she sat in her silent living room and remembered Claire's face at the altar. Vanessa punished herself every time she walked into a room and felt the cold shoulder of a world that had seen through her. And Claire, somewhere, in a town none of them would ever find, was teaching women who had been told they were nothing that they were everything. She was not thinking about Richard. She was not thinking about Eleanor. She was not thinking about Vanessa. She was thinking about the women who walked through the doors of her community center with the same look she had once worn at an altar. The look of someone who has been told they are worthless. And she was looking at them the way no one had looked at her on the day it mattered most. With respect, with warmth, with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that a person's worth is never determined by the people who fail to see it. And that is the lesson of this story. Not that money reveals the truth about people. Not that hidden identities are more exciting than open ones. Not that revenge is sweeter than forgiveness. But that love, real love, the kind that does not ask for bank statements or family names or social standing, is the rarest and most valuable thing in this world. And when you find it, you do not hand it divorce papers at an altar. You hold it. You protect it. You honor it. Because if you let it go, if you let arrogance or greed or the opinions of others convince you it is not enough, you will spend the rest of your life searching for it in every room you enter and every person you meet. And you will never find it again. Not because it does not exist, but because it was already yours, and you let it walk away.